It is another interesting edition of the Economy and Politics show, where we bring you key economic developments as it affects the households. This edition will focus on the rising tide of inflation and its implications for the households. And my guest is Dr. Biodun Adedipe, Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria and the Chief Consultant, Biodun Adedipe Associates. It's nice to have you, Doctor, looking very refreshed.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Abati. And I want to say also a very big thank you for having me on the program this morning.
Yes, I can see your Made in Nigeria print. Very lovely outfit.
Thank you very much. We want to promote Made in Nigeria as part of our own response, to the economic challenges we are facing.
Very apt. To our viewers, this year, the major socioeconomic hurdle facing nations is inflation. The United States of America is experiencing its highest inflation rates since 1981 at about 8.5%. United Kingdom's consumer price index on its own part is about 7%, which is also rising, while the figures for Nigeria and Ghana are 15.92% and 19% plus respectively. This means the purchasing power parity of citizens are currently eroded, and this have wide implications for households. This is why this conversation is very important today. But before we begin this conversation, let's give you a quick wrap of activities that occurred in the economy last week. The International Monetary Fund upgraded its projection for Nigeria's economic growth in 2022. This was on the premise that the rise in global oil price will improve the growth prospect of Nigeria in the year. Currently, from its projection, it's a 0.7% increase level, and this was also part of the conversations at the April edition of the World Economic Outlook, which focused on war sets back the global recovery. Also, Nigeria's external reserves rose by $243.83 million in 19 days, according to figures obtained from the Central Bank of Nigeria. The CBN revealed in its data on movement in reserves that the value rose from $39.54 billion as of April 1st, 2022 to $39.78 billion as of April 19th, 2022. External reserves fell by $243 million in March, after starting the month at $39.86 billion before falling to $39.55 billion on March 30th. We'll go on a brief break, and when we return, we will have this conversation.
Tune in to WebTV Daily to stay up to date and informed on the financial market, personal finance, and more. We have got you covered with all your favorite TV shows, economy and politics, market review, women's series, millennial talk, Islamic Finance Weekly, The Brief, exclusive interviews, events, and we keep you up to date on all the updates in the financial market with the market opening gong. Watch premium content. Watch WebTV. Same news, different perspective.
Thank you and welcome back. If you are joining us, it is the Economy and Politics show, and we are discussing the rising tide of inflation and implications for households. And my guest is Dr. Biodun Adedipe, a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria and also the Chief Consultant of Biodun Adedipe Associates. He's also a very seasoned economist, well respected in Nigeria. Now, let's first look, Doctor, at the developments in the inflation situation across the globe, and first look at how it's really affecting the nation. As we read earlier, US, UK, Nigeria, and Ghana, it's a rising tide. What's your first response to this whole development across the globe as it affects Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you so very much for that. Now, there are two major drivers of inflation at the global level currently. One comes and dates back to 2 years ago, when governments all around the world, perhaps with very few exemptions, engaged in fiscal stimulus in order to ensure that COVID-19 did not drag the economies into depression, that's a slump. So in the process, most economies managed to experience recession that was moderated, so they did not go into slump. That was when this spiral began, okay? And of course, many economists also at the time were looking ahead at a time like this, that there was the possibility that after stimulating the economy to survive the adverse effect of COVID-19 as a pandemic, there's the likelihood that economies might begin to tank in terms of growth. And therefore, there is the possibility, therefore, that by the time we get to half year 2022 and look into 2023, countries may have to begin to worry about stagflation, in which case they stop growing, but inflation continues to rise. And then also, when governments were introducing fiscal stimulus, the monetary authorities, again, all over the world, not just in Nigeria or in Africa, all over the world, were also embarking on what we call, let me put it this way, expansionary monetary policy. At times we also call it accommodative monetary policy, in which case interest rates went downwards to start with. Secondly, many central banks, reserve banks all around the world also introduced quantitative easing. And that simply meant buying bonds in order to put more liquidity in the system. So the combination of accommodative monetary policy and fiscal stimulus started the inflationary pressures we are witnessing today. Now that became compounded by the Russia-Ukrainian war, which now also affected the supply of very important materials to the global economy, talking about grains, wheat especially, talking of basic metals, talking of oil and gas, because between those two countries, they account for significant amounts of those resources that are put into the global economy. So the combination of those two now brought what I would describe as the unprecedented inflationary pressures, at least in the last 20, 30 years. We made reference to the US inflation rates at 8.5%. The US had not seen such rates in the last 40 years plus. Okay, same thing is happening to UK, most countries in Europe, and the rest of the world. So the reality today is that the inflationary pressures we are seeing largely came from fiscal stimulus, accommodative monetary policy, and now the supply effect of the Ukrainian-Russian war.
Now, Doctor, in Nigeria's case, what are the major drivers? Is it a cost push or demand push scenario? I know that in the last report that showed this 15.92% for March, we had this knowledge about the rising fuel price and, of course, food costs.
For Nigeria, as I started saying, the key issues for us are peculiar somewhat. That means beyond fiscal stimulus, which Nigeria, of course, was also part of, accommodative monetary policy, which Nigeria also was part of. But more specifically, I will put it this way, that the inflation we are seeing in Nigeria today is more of cost push rather than demand pull. And there are a number of reasons that we can profile here to justify that position. The first of them is what I put as the position of power and energy in Nigeria. That is fundamental, and it has a large cost implication in terms of corporates, manufacturers, producers, service providers having to generate their own power in order to ensure they run 24/7. So in which case, the extra cost of generating power by either the household itself or corporate organizations and even government entities, by the way, all have their cost implications. And that, of course, affects the ultimate end, either in terms of the product or the services being produced or provided for consumers. So that is a very major component of the cost profile of producers in Nigeria. Secondly, is the issue of insecurity, which of course means two things this way. The first is that it affects output to start with. And then on the other hand, it also affects the cost of distribution. I call it logistics cost, either in terms of bringing raw materials into factories or taking out the finished products to the market. Now, because of insecurity causing disruptions, that also escalates the cost of distribution. And I'll give you a simple illustration here. There is a young fellow who is a driver in one of the large corporate entities in Lagos. Recently, the young man told me that he is from Borno State. Okay. That in his family, the enterprise in the family is cultivation of beans. He said his family alone in a year used to produce 200 bags of beans.
200 bags?
200 bags of beans, his family only. And he said they all had to abandon the farms. He now came to Lagos and took a job as a driver. Let me even be more specific. In the Dangote Group. He's one of the drivers in the Dangote Group. So you know that this is a real life story, not hypothetical. All right. So now I looked at the inflation data that the MBS churned out recently, especially the one in March 2022, about the prices of food items. Interestingly, and that was why I now latched on this particular thing this young man told me a few weeks ago. The first item in that MBS report is the price of beans.
Beans. That
in the last 1 year, between March 2021 and March 2022, the price of 1 kilogram of beans went up by 46.64%. And in fact, the state with the worst showing there is Ebonyi State, where the price was almost double the average for the entire country of 1 kilogram of beans. That insecurity, therefore, is an issue affecting production because you lose some output there, and also affecting logistics, which is movement of raw materials and other, items. Now, number three, a major issue in Nigeria is the exchange value of the naira.
The exchange rate.
Even when the rate is found to be somewhat stable, but if you look at where the exchange value of the naira was September 2021 and where it was in March 2022, especially in reference to the parallel market that everybody wants to look at, you won't find any significant difference in the exchange value of the naira in the roadside market. September 2021, March 2022. But every seller in the market make reference to exchange value of the naira as an excuse for marking up its price. I link that to the issue of the psyche of the seller in Nigeria. Okay, the psyche of the average retailer is that the naira is losing value. Whether the facts and figures actually confirm or buttress that, but that's the psyche. They tell you naira is losing value, therefore I need to mark up the price at which I sell. Okay, that also goes on to the issue of expected inflation, because this is something I've also heard each time I interrogate retailers related to inflation. And they will tell you that the battery I'm selling to you, I bought it at so price in December 2021. If I need to replace it now, I'm going to spend more to replace that. So I have to mark up the stock I have on hand. And that comes to the issue of expected inflation. So the fellow now tells you that the reason he's increasing his price is because of his expectation of where inflation rate will go to. So that also is a factor in the cost pull inflation we're experiencing in Nigeria. Take also the issue of inputs. This now talks to data. If you look at our merchandise trade data for the year 2021, January to December, capital goods and parts represented 20.26% of our imports. Also within that same year, industrial supplies accounted for 14.03%, which means inputs into manufacturing in Nigeria, about 34.29% of that was imported. So if the exchange value of the naira is not stable, therefore, that also will affect the cost of those inputs that are imported, which of course goes through what we call pass-through to the consumers at the end of the day, one way or the other. So when you take all of this together, you find that you have evidence to prove that the inflation we are experiencing in Nigeria is largely cost push in nature.
Largely cost push, Doctor. And when you look at policy, a lot of things have been suggested from IMF and its World Bank reports on growth in Nigeria, and of course, its concerns. On one tranche, IMF, the International Monetary Fund, feels that countries should raise interest rates to tackle inflation. That's one tranche. And then for Nigeria, the advice to the monetary policy authorities is to review its what is described as restrictive foreign exchange to various items. They have to review that. But from your perspective as an economist who has been a member of economic advisory policy to the government, what do you think should be the mix of fiscal and monetary policy approach at this time?
All right, thank you so very much for that. Now, the first thing is the recommendation by IMF that we should raise rates. Of course, that is the natural, response of anyone looking at an inflationary environment, that the central bank or reserve bank should raise the policy rate as a way of checking inflationary pressures. We call that the textbook reference. But when we talk about economic management, nowadays, we are more pragmatic. Pragmatic response will mean you look at the peculiarities of the environment where you are. So in this instance, the question to ask is, inflation in Nigeria, we've established is cost push. Yeah. And interestingly, one of the elements in that I didn't even talk about is interest rates as well. Okay? But this time around, we normally say there are three major economic agents: the households, and then you have the corporates, or let's call it corporate organizations, and then we talk about the government, all right? Now, when you look at these three major stakeholders in an economy, in the credit market in Nigeria, the bulk of the credit goes to corporates and governments, not to households. Okay, because we still have a very limited consumer credit market. So it then means that if you increase your policy rate, I like to interpret it always as a signal rate. Because anytime the CBN raises or reduces the policy rate, it's a signal to the banking system that financial institutions should either raise their own lending rate or drop it. Now, if they mark up interest rates as recommended by IMF, policy rate goes up, signal to our banks is to also increase their lending rates. If they increase lending rates, who are those to be likely impacted? Basically, those that take the chunk of the banking system credit. And that will be corporates and government, not households. Okay? Unlike if you play the same card in the American system, you find that even UK and mainland Europe, you find that credit is a culture there that runs through households, corporates, and government. And so the impact of a policy rate adjustment is much higher in such environments than in Nigeria. And of course, if interest rate goes up, it impacts the cost of companies as well. What we call now finance cost. Yeah. And if they also will respond strategically to that, that means they will find a way to pass that cost also through to the consumers of their products or their services. So in which case, marking up policy rates in Nigeria today, in my own interpretation, is more likely to spike inflationary pressures rather than check them.
Okay.
So we have some window of opportunity on the fiscal side. And I say that also with every sense of responsibility, that when inflationary pressures are going up, and of course, this is, let me say, on the side of monetary authorities, it's a global phenomenon, all right, that many of them had abandoned their primary mandate, which in central banking language we call inflation targeting. And rightly so, because of the need to fight the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, all right? Now, that given, it means we see central banks now do beyond what is traditionally known to be monetary policy. So all of them went on mission drift, okay? Yeah. And not all of them are looking at themselves as under serious pressure, okay, to raise policy rates to deal with inflation. In which case, if that is not going to apply in Nigeria, then we should look at the side of the fiscal authorities. So the question then is, the fiscal authorities must find the courage at a time like this to rein in unproductive spending. But what we see is that we are still running our government at the central, that's national and subnational levels, as business as usual. Okay? And we must also bring into the conversation the fact that 2022 is a pre-election year.
Yeah.
And so we cannot avoid a lot of fiscal operations that push liquidity out there. All right? So it then means we are looking at many elephants in the room. Unfortunately, the room is dark.
Yeah.
So we have no idea of how big the elephants are or how small they are. So but the question for us is that at this point in time, the fiscal authorities must also wake up to their responsibility and not look only at the monetary authorities as the one charged with responsibility for dealing with inflationary pressures. It must be both sides.
Okay, doctor, I mean, that's very important. They should wake up. But in terms of the restrictive approach, in 30 seconds, yes, for monetary policy, what is your take on that?
Well, my take on that is that, yes, in my own interpretation, inflation as of today is not yet a crisis. And why do I say that? We don't need to look far. Just go back to January 2021, just a year and 3 months ago. What was the inflation rate in Nigeria? Up until March 2021. We only began to see inflation rate trend downwards from April 2021. So in which case, the issue for us is, if we still go the way of tackling the supply side of the equation, we are likely to see a dampening. But the primary one for me is food inflation, which is the major challenge in Nigeria. So in which case, if monetary authorities will continue to be accommodative, let it be in the direction of food supply and food security. If they do that, we are likely to have a positive impact on the rate of inflation through food inflation control, rather than through monetary policy rate, knowing the antecedents. In fact, when you run a regression, interestingly, I'm a researcher, okay? We likely see a positive correlation between interest rates in Nigeria and inflation rate, contrary to what you see in advanced economists, which is what informed the advice that IMF is giving to us. It's a contrary thing in Nigeria.
So that's very instructive. Accommodative for monetary policy that addresses food supply and food security is very key. But lastly, doctor, in just 30 seconds, what's your final word to Nigerians in this challenging socioeconomic phase, and how does this really impact the households? How can they navigate this?
Fantastic question. Now, let me start from the impact on households. No doubt, inflation is going to affect the cost of living. All right, that one is given. What that also means is real income will shrink, no doubt, which means what you earn now, if there's no increase in that, then the quantity of goods and services you can buy will reduce. That also will impact the quality of life. We used to call that standard of living, but we call it now the quality of life, adversely affected. So how should households respond to this? The first line I put before them is to set priorities. Because when your income in real terms cannot put on the table for you the quantum of food you used to buy a year, 6 months, 3 months ago, it means you need to reset your priorities. Secondly, is to seek a lawful expansion of income, which case we need to learn and acquire new skills and, of course, knowledge, which comes from the likes of ProShare. Or people can get a lot of information from ProShare, either to boost their knowledge or even enhance their skills. If you do that, to expand your capacity to generate more income. And lastly, it's also a time that households should begin to think of what they can do to generate income across the borders. And that has a lot of positive implications, not only for the income of the household, but for the national economy, in terms of how it plays out financially. internationally.
No wonder we're seeing very strategic moves, and it's very important that the quality of people that go out is improved, like we see in India and China, because that also helps, like you rightly said, in good diaspora remittances. But it's very clear that we have to diversify income, and also, but legitimately, because one fact is not for doctor is that in times like this too, crimes tend to increase and all that, so people have to do things legitimately.
Right.
Legitimately. Thank you very much, Dr. Biodun Adedipe, for this very insightful conversation and giving us broader perspective on the inflation trends and how it impacts the household. Very nice to understand how fiscal policy should wake up and complement what monetary policy is doing, and what monetary policy should focus on, particularly the issue of food supply and food security. If we can address, like you said, the food inflation, it will really have impact and begin to tackle the whole trend, which is really impacting the households. But thank you very much once again, Dr. Biodun Adedipe, an economist, well-seasoned one and well-respected in Nigeria and across board, and also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria and the chief consultant of Biodun Adedipe Associates. Also a very strategic consulting firm that helps to enlighten Nigerians on how they can navigate economic issues, just like you posted for ProShare too. Thank you very much once again, Doctor.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And it's always like that, conversing with you.
Yes,
very much appreciated.
Thank you, Doctor. And that'll be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, I guess you must have, because inflation affects everyone. I mean, households down to all strata. How is it impacting households, the rising tide of inflation? Please send your comments or questions and suggestions to Ottoabasi Abasiekong at proshenji.com, and we'll be glad to respond to you. Just like our guest has said, visit our website, www.proshenji.com, to read our latest news articles, stories, and reports on the Nigerian economy. And we have a lot of stories around the inflation rate, what various analysts and what we, our very robust and rich research team, has written around inflation and how it can be navigated. Also, our social media platforms are displayed on the screen for you, just to follow all the updates on the economy. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching and have a nice day.